welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have my guest today, Dr. Leigh Belhumeur. Lorry, welcome.
Thank you. So great to be here.
So Lorry is a renowned leader in the field of mental health with over 30 years of experience serving children and their families. As a licensed psychologist and leader in the nonprofit sector addressing mental health and wellness for kids, youth, and their families, Dr. Lorry has been a driving force behind the implementation of various evidence-based practices and strategies for buffering the impact of trauma and the effects of the toxic stress response, as well as building resilience. Dr. Lorry was an early adopter of the Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs framework, in her local community, which she continues to use as a context for understanding and addressing mental health needs. She's been recognized as a subject matter expert and is frequently sought out for speaking engagements and training on the topics of building resilience, ACEs, and trauma-informed care, as well as finding your purpose. Today, we're going to be talking about her book, Mastering Resilience, Transforming into Your Purpose. Lorry, welcome.
Again, so great to be here. What an honor and privilege to be with you again.
Appreciate that. Yeah. So for those who aren't familiar, well, before we start off here, where are you from originally and where are you currently?
Well, there's two, I would say, because I was originally born in the Midwest in Indiana, near Indianapolis. And then I grew up in San Diego, California. And now I'm in Orange County, California.
Okay. So really interesting bio. Let's move right into this. How did you get into this field?
That's a great question. I'm often asked. So what I know is that really early on, I kind of knew that I wanted to take care of people. I was a babysitter, like all those things. I just was always like a nurturer and people listened to me. And I thought I was going to be a nurse or a teacher, which is what women back then had the choices of. And so, I went away to college thinking I was going to be a nurse, bombed in science classes, completely bombed. Like I went from honor roll to like academic probation and, in an instant. And so so one of this really well-meaning, who happened to be the head of the psychology department and the assistant dean at the college, said, maybe you could consider psychology. You're really good at that. So that was really how the academic, to become a psychologist came about. And I knew immediately when I changed my major to psych, it was like, I'm getting a Ph.D. And also the other trajectory was really because, we're talking about childhood adversity, things of that nature, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. And I didn't call them that. We didn't call them that back then. It was child abuse. And so there was a lot of, chaos in my family growing up. And once I went into psychology, I realized I wanted to heal myself. And also I wanted to help other children who experience similar, backgrounds when they were younger.
First of all, I just want to say that I really identify with your background because when I first started my path, I wanted to become a physician and I bombed the science. I mean, like traumatically
Yes.
so. I'm curious, just personally, how did that impact you? Like self-esteem wise, when you you said, but you used the word bombed.
I did. I really did. And
did that impact you at all? Or you're like, screw it, I'm moving on?
No, it completely impacted me. And I didn't really get it right away. So I'll tell you again, it was like, I was on the honor roll. I was accustomed to getting very, very, very good grades in high school, and then went to college. And the first semester, I got to tell you, the first pre-test I got was a big fat F. Like, I'd never gotten an F in my life. And I was like, this can't be, it was just kind of, there was so much cognitive dissonance around it. I didn't know that's what it was called back then, but it was just like, this doesn't seem real. And then when the grade card came, and I knew I was struggling in microbiology and organic chemistry and those things that you need to take to become, but, I remember really crying a lot in that person, getting that letter that said academic probation. I was just like, what am I going to do? And so what I did was I re-enrolled in the science classes. I was like, I'm going to try again. And about halfway through was when I realized this, I really don't like science. I don't know why I chose this profession. It's not, what I'm uniquely designed for. I do like the sciences, brain science and things like that, but I didn't like microbiology and organic chemistry. So, but it was really, it was more than humbling. It was devastating, really.
Well, yeah, I can completely relate to that. And we could probably talk about that on a different episode. But, when the topic of kids comes up, I mean, my heart just opens and melts simultaneously. What was it about working with kids, or what is it about working with kids that resonates with you?
Well, if I can go into story again really quickly. So after my undergrad, I went back to San Diego and I worked in a locked psychiatric facility for youth. And I remember at that time, I was about, 22 years old at the time. And some of these youth were 17. And I'm like, there's just this amount, there's very little age difference here. And I did what they're doing. I just either didn't get caught or didn't have parents with means or, whatever, but it was just kind of like, there's no difference. Yes, there were a couple hospitalized at a time that had really severe psychiatric conditions. And mostly the others were like runaways and sadness, anxiety, things like that. So I think in there, it was like, I'm not much different than that. And so, I have a college degree and just like looking at the difference, but it was like, I want to help. I want to help. I've been through some of the same experiences and this is what I'm driven to do. So, not all, but most of my experience, in the process of becoming a psychologist, was with youth.
So how did things unfold for you?
Well, so how they unfolded was there were like steps along the way. So first was this changing the major. Then there was youth psychiatric. I came back into graduate school, started working on an inpatient psych unit that was adults and medically, what is it called? Like a dual diagnosis with medical. I also became a certified nurse's aide in high school. So I used that experience and was on the med psych floor. And so again, I was, as a student, I was mainly a listener. I wasn't trained as a counselor. My title was psych tech. But there was that just knowing that people were helped, that there was something that the interactions really, and I think from like, when I think back on it and think about who I am now, it's just like total acceptance, just total love, for people and just wanting to pour out acceptance and just knowing that a lot of the time when, some of the precursors or precipitating events that got them where they were was childhood trauma. They were talking about those things. And so there was that. And then because I went into counseling psychology or into even clinical psychology through the School of Education at UCLA. And so once I got my master's, I became an educational consultant. And so even in that role, I was working with kids and I taught them, I wasn't like teaching them the subjects. I was teaching them study skills. I was teaching them, how to be confident, how to study better, how to get, better grades. And it was also in that place that I saw these kids just shine and go from D's to A's and just looking at like the confidence that was created as a result of that. And also at the same time, I was teaching at the same place where I went to undergrad. And so I was teaching developmental psychology and abnormal psychology and general psychology and communications. And it was also then that really became like I just absorb this content and like how to transform it into something that is, meaningful and helpful for the people that I'm on the planet to serve, really. And so that's how and then I took an internship at a nonprofit. I was children and youth, focused. And I would say the rest is history because really there was a trajectory first in community mental health. And I went into private practice, had a thriving private practice, mostly adolescents, girls. And then I just, I said, my heart's in community. And so I went back into community mental health and, eventually, entered into a leadership position. And in that role, working with children and youth, the ripple effect and the, as a clinician, maybe 25, 30 cases, as a program director, maybe 400, 500, 600. And, in a high leadership, it could be 35,000, in a year. So it's really, it's like wanting to break the cycle. That was like, I would say, breaking the cycle so that, one of the things I said in one of my, I did a little film about my own story a while back. And I said, I don't want that 17-year-old girl to be 57 before she finally gets it, that she is loved, that she is worthy, that she is valued. And I just generalize that to, all children now.
So first of all, it's interesting to hear you talk about when you started studying psychology and all those. You could see how that was making sense in contrast to the other sciences that weren't.
Right.
And it seems like you found your home there. Lorry, what is it do you feel about you or your experience that's allowed you and even inspired you to do this work?
About me. What I believe is that the adversity that I experienced as a child and even adversity later on in life, that for whatever reason, by God's grace, whatever reason, I was able to look at it and say, that can't be in vain. There must be some good purpose that can be created out of that travesty. And I think that's what it was. That, and even I remember I was telling somebody this the other day. I remember even in high school, I would say if I made a mistake today, I would say, I'm going to be a better person tomorrow. I'm striving to always be better. or if I'm today and I remember something yesterday, today is going to be, I'm going to be a better person than I was yesterday. And I really have lived by that motto. Of course, there have been seasons where I'm not thinking about that. I might be, having my little pity party or something, in the past. Those are smaller and shorter. But I think the combination of those two things, I didn't call it abuse back then. Other people may have, another story, I was babysitting. I was babysitting 4 children. I was 13. They were 11, 9, 7, and 5, so there's 5 of us young people. And so I went to the mom and I said, what is child abuse? Is this, I'm 13, 14 years old, those 2 summers. And she said, well, it's not spanking. It's really when somebody picks up something inanimate, like a Noxema jar, and just like uncontrollably, wails on a child. And so I was like, oh, then what I'm experiencing must not be child abuse. And even though bruises were, even there was all kinds of things going on, I just didn't experience it that way. And so I think my defense mechanisms that I, sort of developed over time, I was able to compartmentalize them. And now I look at it as like I was able to dissociate from those things so that I could find meaning in my life. Because I think if I'd not been able to do that, I most certainly would have gone down a different path.
So I want to segue into the book, and I want to do that by asking you. I mean, you mentioned an example of an adolescent girl, and I feel there's a lot of misunderstandings culturally we have about kids and adolescents in particular, and about their resilience. Mm-hmm. But in your experience in working with kids who've experienced trauma of various kinds, first of all, when you meet them, how do you meet them and begin to get to know them and quote unquote work with them?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So the key is to, as we all know as therapists, is sort of to meet them where they are. And without knowing the science, when I first started as a psychologist and working with children, I didn't know about adverse childhood experiences and the ACEs science and the brain science of all of that. I now look at every kind of trauma through that lens of ACEs and other adversities that, there's tons of data around, and even, the most recent pandemic. Anyway, so, in meeting, it's really like, what we know is that a caring, dependable adult who believes in a child is the very thing that can make a difference. So it really was that they could come into the office. It was a safe place. They could talk about anything. There was obviously developing rapport. And it was, at that time, it was really connecting and just really honoring their strengths. And even today, that's what it would be. It's like really looking at the strengths, that we can call them superpowers, or, that those things that make their heart sing. What do they love? What are they good at? What are their, beliefs? What are, and so it's really just to get them to be able to stand firm in their uniqueness that is valued and wanted and honored and all of that, so that when these other things come, they're firm in their, who they are uniquely. And so if they hear lies, regardless of who's telling them, they can know their value and be less impacted by that. So even, in my early years and to this day, that's really the focus, is like, who am I? What's knowing my intrinsic value, knowing that, I'm valued just because I exist. Mm-hmm. And then there's all of these other things layered on top of it that are just really amazing and wonderful, that makes me, makes you, if I'm talking to a young person.
When you first started, did you come from that perspective?
I think, yes, I think it was always strength. What is this person's strength? And that's what I would, in speaking with the parents, rather than say that, so-and-so said this in the session, is really, these are the strengths that are coming out. Let's focus on finding the good. Let's focus on finding the good. And, if you can, like, kind of ignore, as long as you're safe, ignore some of those other things, but really find the things that be very specific, not good job, daughter, good job, son. It's really, I really appreciate the way that you took initiative and put the dishes away, or, whatever it is, to just notice the good in them. So that was definitely like right from the beginning.
So let's kind of segue here to the book, Mastering Resilience. Why did you write this, and who is it for?
Well, I wrote it because, I had started to do some training on adverse childhood experiences. And so I was out training on that, and I would train, large groups of people. And sometimes it would be teachers or school administrators. And often it would be counselors or counselors in training, or psychologists, college counselors. And we were doing the ACEs screening in that venue. And so we would put it up on the board, people anonymously. We also had people in the room who were, available in case someone needed to talk to someone, based on taking the screening. And it became apparent, and we kind of knew intuitively, but it became apparent with data, that the very people who are in our profession, the people who gravitate to youth serving professions, are the very ones that experienced adversity in childhood. And so I was like, here we are, and some have not healed. And that in order to break the cycles, the youth in our care, the youth that depend on us, even if we're a parent, the youth that depend on us are only going to get as far as we have on our healing journey. And so what I did is, in thinking about just kind of what is the content, is I reversed engineered this 30 years of experience that I've had in the education sector, in, counseling, in the nonprofit, all of that, 30 years of experience. And I said to myself, okay, we're talking about building resilience. We're talking about mastering resilience. We're talking about, like, that's the thing that kind of sets people apart for those who really are successful. And, that term has, lots of different meanings for different people, but I'm, mean it generally. And what's the difference between that group of people and those that aren't, that maybe have, alcohol misuse, drug misuse, other kinds of things? What's the difference? And looking at resilience. And then it's like, okay, what are the key elements of resilience? That my clients and people that I've interacted, counselors that I've trained over the years. So it's written to that person. It's actually written to a teacher or, a counselor or somebody who is in the youth serving, field. And it's really a recipe. It's a recipe based on these sort of research-based ingredients that result in mastering resilience. So it's a recipe. It's got 8 specific ingredients. It's really easy to follow. There's a workbook coming out that goes along with the book very soon, coming out. It's with the publisher. And so it's a process. And it's something where it's based on mindset shifts. And so it's for us. It's for us to break cycles. And the interesting thing, I just want to, throw this out there. The interesting thing, it's, it is a bestseller. It's award-winning, all of those things in the less than 3 months that it's been out.
Wow.
The biggest feedback that I've received, the most positive feedback, when people are saying that transformed my life, are people outside of the therapy, outside of youth serving. It's attorneys and CEOs and med students and, all of these, professions and businesses that it wasn't necessarily intended for, but it really is like all of us can benefit from a process of becoming super resilient.
Okay. Define resilience.
So resilience is really if we use the APA, the American Psychological Term, it's really the ability to adapt. It's not bounce back like a ball. Bruce Perry, Dr. Bruce Perry, and Oprah in their What Happened to You book talks about it's like a coat hanger, so it's like it's never going to be back to its original form, but we can, and what I think it is what I add to it is that it's the strength. It's the thing that makes it stronger, and like sometimes we say when things get broken, or even just if I look at it, even the kintsugi bowl on the front that's a symbol. It's that in that brokenness, we can fill in that brokenness and be stronger, be more beautiful, be more worthy. And that's how I define the product of resilience. And resilience is the ability to adapt to those things and also to, in the recipe, to really reframe them in a way that says, I am who I am because of those things. I'm not broken. I'm not, and so I guess that's my long-winded answer of what resilience is.
Okay. So with the understanding that, we're not going to go through the entirety of the book here, give us some insight into what is required to develop or cultivate that type of resilience.
Well, the tagline of the book is transforming into your purpose. So one of the things really is the person reading the book doesn't have to know what their purpose is right off the bat. There is an element of really having a direction, a destination, like in the future, tomorrow or 10 years from now, what is it that you want to be? What do you want? What do you want for yourself? And who do you get to be in order to create that for yourself? So that I call it the big why. Other people talk about the why, the vision, and all of that, but it's really that sense of, what's the direction so we can create a roadmap to get there. And then it's also about making the commitment to ourselves to actually take action to get there, because sometimes we're paralyzed by our fears and our thoughts and all of that
traumas.
Right. Yes, exactly. And what we tell ourselves as a result of those traumas, and so it's really also identifying those very things, identifying the things that we're telling ourselves about ourselves, really paying attention to those things, and then realizing, making the connection between what we're telling ourselves and how we're feeling and how we're behaving, and really, shifting the possibility of making mindset shifts that look at, again, what's the positive that came out of it. It's not denying that horrible, abusive things happen. Not at that. It's not forgiving and forgetting. It's not that at all. It's both and. It's like horrible things happened. Maybe the person never apologized, like all those things. And also, I am who I am. What is it about me and the qualities of who I've become as a result of those things, and really getting grounded on that value. So getting grounded on the value, making a commitment to move forward, just defining, who you get to be, in that, and then taking those actions. That's just the first few steps.
Well, those are major steps. And I think oftentimes those can be giant steps for people who've been numbed and debilitated by trauma. What? I can't even begin to think about what my purpose is or where I want to go. What do you say to someone who maybe responds like that? What do you mean?
Okay. So, and that's true. Like a lot of people don't. But here's the first thing is I want to make sure that that the reader or, the person that's talking to me about it, this is not a substitute for trauma-informed therapy. It's not at all. In fact, if someone hasn't had some sort of therapy, it's probably not the right time to read the book or go through the exercises, because there are, different things like EMDR and, things that can be used that are very effective to rewire the brain, more rapidly. And of course, there's, cognitive behavior therapy, TFCBT, all of the trauma-informed therapies. And I would say if someone hasn't done something specifically to, if they're still in that very, very, very numb place and they haven't sort of come out of it, then wait,
Sure.
till after. And so for the other one is like what I say to the person who says, I don't have a purpose. Well, the point is, you don't need to know your purpose. What we're asking you is if you can envision yourself in the future and money wasn't an option, success was the only option. What would that look like? And it could be just, for some, I get my GED. It could be, I'm going to enroll in graduate school and I'm going to get my master's degree in education, or I'm going to become a therapist, or I decided to be a psychologist. So it's just something more like, what would you like, however you define success, if success was the only option, what can you identify? And then there's some, exercises around that. And so initially it's like going through each of, the ingredients, and the purpose comes later. In the beginning, it's just the big why. Like, what's your inspiration? Not your purpose. What's your inspiration?
It sounds very hopeful. It sounds very positive. I like what you're saying about focusing on the positive. Well, not ignoring what happened,
right?
But also focusing on the positive. And I think that a lot of times gets lost in the discussion when we're talking about trauma. Lorry, I love talking to you. You have such a great presence, and this book just is amazing. Mastering Resilience, Transforming into Your Purpose. Where can people get it?
It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I just found out today it's on Walmart.com, but it's mostly on Amazon is where I point people, to the book. Yes.
Okay. We'll have it linked up here at the show notes page. Love to have you back. You're just a delight to speak with.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Well, the easiest way is to go to my website, which is the first part of my book, which is masteringresilience.com.
Okay.
And so there's all kinds of information. That's the best way to get a hold of me.
Okay. And in addition to the book, what other ways are you working with people or speaking? What's going on?
Well, yes, I'm doing speaking and some unpaid and paid. People are buying the book and giving to the audience. So I have an opportunity to do that. I mean, on the website, there's an opportunity to sort of inquire about that. And I'm doing book signings. The next one is the end of this month in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I'll be in Chicago and some other places on behalf of the book. Those will be posted on the website also if I'm going to be in different cities. And as I said, I'm working on the workbook. It's in the publisher right now. And then there's another book that's in the making right now. It's the third book for this year. And it is for those people that have demonstrated and incorporated these particular ingredients in whatever order to be super resilient. So the working title is Becoming Super Resilient. And so it's a series of, 24 success stories of people in every sector, many sectors, many businesses, women, diversified in terms of their businesses and what they do, and diversified in terms of the population that are becoming super resilient. So looking forward to that later on in the year as well.
That's so inspiring. Great having you on here. And
Thank
again, I'd
you
love to
so
have
much.
you back. You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. And I agree with you. Your presence and everything is just so inviting. And I just really appreciate being here. And I would look forward to coming back.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you saying that.
Yes.
All right. Be well.
Be well. You too.